Before XLG.
Okay.
And I like that.
There's a recording.
Working up in good days.
We'll see if we're actually sharing.
They have a paid option. I'm on a free option.
Says I am.
Yep,
Grab
we're
Okay.
good.
Oh, no, I see a typo.
It's several, I tell you.
Oh, they have?
I can.
Oh,
Several.
I don't type very well,
I do.
but I guess start recording is the same thing, right?
Several, I tell you.
Um, there are certain things that are quite a few actually that are prohibited. Obscene or indecent language, is it prohibited at all times? It's kind of subjective of, you know it when you see it or hear it kind of things. Music, you can't broadcast music except when it's incidental to retransmission of manned spacecraft communications, because they used to wake up the astronauts playing music. So that's why that exception is in there. You can't send encoded messages where you're obfuscating the contents, except when you're controlling, sending control commands to a space station, not the space station, or to radio control craft like cars, airplanes, boats, because that's an encoded one-way transmission. And that's an exception.
When you say, you mean encrypted? Is that what that means, encoded or?
Anything that um, obscures the data. In other words, it has to be in the clear
Clear
text. Or if it is encoded, you have to publish the algorithms or whatever's necessary to decode
I'm talking to you, and we came up with like some language. I'm not allowed to do that. Use that language and nobody knows.
it.
You come up with a secret
Probably
language
not.
that only we know.
If you published it, we could.
I'm just curious. I just want to,
You need a secret language like CB lingo.
well,
where words have different meanings.
Yeah.
yeah, we could come up with a different language where,
Well, like an example of on a digital voice on walkie-talkies. I mean, it's encoded and digitized, but the algorithms are out there, and anybody, is capable of decoding it.
right.
In theory. You're restricted to some countries. So if a country has notified the International Telecommunications Union that it objects to transmission from other countries,
Would that be sanctioned countries? North Korea, for example, Cuba, whoever.
I don't have the list, but I would assume there's some countries like North Korea, China.
Nobody wants me talking to somebody in North Korea
Right, because they don't want you
because the FBI will show up at my house.
giving them misinformation. What, if any, are the restrictions concerning transmission of language that may be considered indecent or obscene?
Such language.
And the ITU does not have a list of words that I'm aware of.
Well, they'd have to update it on a regular basis.
Yeah, seriously.
Especially with these kids today.
Under what conditions is an amateur station permitted to transmit music using a phone emission? That's an easy one. When is it permissible to transmit messages encoded to obscure their meaning?
Only are all, it's easy. It'll have
So-
to be
so you're-
pass only,
You're going with Delta?
correct? Oh,
You can
Yeah.
do it.
I probably should read the entire sentence
Yeah.
instead of saying, I go only, rule those out, never.
Yeah, it's almost never, except those two cases. Which countries, with which countries are FCC licensed amateur radio stations prohibited from exchanging communications? Actually, I don't know if China is one of those or not, because I've made FT8 contact with stations in China.
I'll find out if the FCC comes with the FBI.
There's no sanctions on China, so. You know, I don't see a problem with China. I work with China all the time.
I can't remember if it was, but I asked that question of somebody recently and I was told that there's no restrictions current.
On anybody or
Not even North Korea.
There was-
No.
If there was restrictions on China, none of our stuff would be being made there. Everything is made there, so
Yeah.
we're never gonna sanction them.
Yeah. And all
Okay.
China has to do to restrict communications is send out a beacon signal to all of our equipment to shut it down.
Okay, payment for operating a station is prohibited, except when it's incidental to classroom instruction.
There's one other exception.
Uh,
If you're a racing operator and you're paid through FEMA,
really?
yeah.
That's not on the test, so
Yeah, it's not on the
I'm
test.
gonna wash that out of my head right now.
But if you're a classroom teacher and you're getting paid and you're teaching something that involves amateur radio, okay, in effect, you're getting paid for operating, you're allowed to do that. You're prohibited to sell stuff, except when you're occasionally buying or selling amateur radio equipment.
Oh my God,
And you see that a lot.
what else? There, sell my car?
You can't do that.
I know, but I mean, you're on amateur radio, you're talking to other amateur people, like, hey, I got a radio for sale, you want it?
Well, you haven't been to many meetings with a lot of hams. They don't talk about amateur radio. They talk about guns, guitars, motorcycles, cars.
Oh, okay, so I don't, all right. I have no experience.
In which of the following circumstances may the control operator of an amateur station receive compensation for operating that station? Yep. When may amateur radio operators use their stations to notify other amateurs of the availability of equipment for sale or trade?
Delta?
Yeah. No, no.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the regular basis, is that once a week, once a month?
Well, you know what's interesting, because they do have traders net,
Well,
which are regular, but one person can be selling stuff every week, but if you want to trade, it can be every week.
that East Coast reflector thing, that's
How about
a big
auctions?
section of it is equipment for
Can they do
sale or
auctions?
trade.
I don't think they can.
Okay, broadcasting, meaning one-way transmissions to the general public are prohibited, except when there's immediate safety of human life or protection of property, basically an emergency situation, which is an exception for virtually everything.
But who is the general public in this case? Because if they don't have a ham radio, you're only talking to ham people, not to.
No, everyone can listen.
Yeah, anybody can listen. You don't have to be amateur.
All right.
So I can't operate as a
that's-
broadcast
yeah,
station
I've had it-
playing music or just
I've
talking.
had it scanned for decades, so yeah.
Yeah, most
I-
everything else is be Twitter or Instagram or
I
something.
think there is an exception about Morse code instruction, where you can broadcast Morse code, I believe,
Well, it would have to be.
because
Doing one
W1AW does it.
3 times a week, 2 hours.
Now, I also do a QST. When I get to a part to let people know that the part's over, I'm going to RP.
You said QST first?
Yeah, QST.
With that,
That's a general broadcast at any station that can hear. So. The training and then the amateur radio news line, but that's rebroadcast. That's another QST.
And you can do international communications if it's, and I never totally understood what that really means, if it's communication incidental to the purposes of amateur radio service and remarks of a personal character. Especially the last part.
this guy's.
What does that really mean?
This guy's the best. So and so is awesome at whatever.
Huh.
Well,
That doesn't say whose personal character you're talking about.
Yeah.
Could be grumpy old men on 80 meters.
yeah. How does the FCC define broadcasting for the amateur radio service? Okay, Delta. I would say that's a good guess. Under which of the following circumstances are one-way transmissions by an amateur radio station prohibited? Bravo.
I want to say Bravo, but I'm going to say all instances as well.
So wouldn't the beacon be a general broadcast?
Yeah. And we know that W1AW broadcasts
So I
Morse
guess
code.
Bravo, but this is Bravo.
Broadcasting. When may amateur stations transmit information in support of broadcasting, program production, or news gathering, assuming no other means is available?
Let's say of human life.
Right. The old catch-all exception to everything. What types of international communications are an FCC licensed amateur radio station permitted to make? Alpha.
Boy, I don't know about.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Alpha.
Yeah, you got to remember that personal character remarks. That's what I use to remember it.
Personal character.
I don't know what it is, but
I hate that guy, or I like that guy. I don't know. That's how I'm looking at it. Like you have to talk about somebody.
okay, control operators and control types. So
Uh-oh.
the control operator is defined as the station licensee by default. So when you get your license, you get a station license and an operator license, and you are the default control operator for that station. As the station licensee, you can designate somebody else to operate your station, provided they have the appropriate license privileges in order to do it. You always have to have a control operator. And it can be any licensed amateur with the appropriate privileges, depending on the band that you're operating on or the mode. If you designate somebody as a control operator other than the licensee, both the control operator and the licensee are responsible for the proper operation. So if your control operator designee is sending out uh, inappropriate language, let's say, you're responsible as well as that person because you are the licensee. So you both get in trouble.
So we're gonna do it to be sure that you can trust the person you give it to.
And when you're trying to communicate with a space station, any amateur that has uplink privileges, meaning you can operate on the frequencies that the satellite is receiving its uplink on, can contact that space station, the amateur space station. The same is true for the International Space Station. If you're licensed and you can operate and they're on 2 meters or 70 centimeters, you can communicate with them. When may an amateur radio station operator transmit without a control operator?
Don't know,
You don't know.
don't know.
Never.
I wouldn't gonna go with never.
Actually, no, when they have a control station operating, transmit without a control.
Never.
I'd say never.
Yeah. Have to have a control operator.
Well, I hope my station is.
Either the licensee or a designee.
I had to reread it because the first instructor I read was A. There
But you
is-
still have, in automatic control, you still have a control operator. And that one comes up a little bit later. Seemed like it probably should have talked about that before this. Who does the FCC presume to be the control operator of an amateur station unless documentation to the contrary is in the station records?
Don't know.
Well, so that's technically not the licensing.
Kidding.
Who must designate the station control operator?
Alpha.
Alpha. When the control operator is not the station licensee, who is responsible for the proper operation of the station?
Delta.
Delta. Everybody, both. Who is accountable if a repeater inadvertently retransmits communications that violate the FCC rules?
Delta.
Are you sure?
Well, the originating station is the offender. Not the repeater. The repeater doesn't know, he's not,
Functions automatically.
the repeater is gonna repeat, it's just
Right.
parrot.
He has no
It's gonna be-
control over it,
There's no control,
except after the fact.
yeah. I mean, he can shut it down, I guess, if it keeps on, he can go and shut his.
So your answer is
Alpha.
alpha, right?
There's another question pertaining to this, right? At some point.
I'm not
Something
sure.
about if the control operator of a repeater happens to notice this, he has to shut it off.
Yeah, I don't know if that's on the tech though.
Okay.
When under normal circumstances, may a technician class licensee be the control operator of a station operating in an amateur extra class band segment.
At no time.
That was the easy one, wasn't it?
There's no option there for life, so no time,
Except for the exception of
like life,
emergency.
emergency,
Right.
somebody's life has to be at stake.
Right. Who may be the control operator of a station communicating through an amateur satellite or space station?
Delta.
Delta. Okay. We define the control point is where the control function is performed, or the function of the control operator. There are three types of control: local, remote, and automatic. In local, which would be your normal configuration where you've got a radio, the control operator is the person that's directly manipulating the controls. Tuning the radio, changing modes, pushing the push to talk button, all that kind of stuff. In remote control operation, the control operator isn't physically required to be there, but they still have to indirectly manipulate the controls, usually over the internet, or some could be telephone link, something like that, where you can be somewhere else and operate the radio. So you're still the control operator, even though you're doing it indirectly, and we call that remote control. If it's called automatic, like a repeater, the control operator isn't present, but they've set up the control, and the repeater just retransmits whatever it receives on its transmit frequency. And you have to have set up some safeguards. Usually there's a time limit on transmit, so it can't sit there and continuously transmit. It'll shut down after so many minutes. Some kind of interlocks like that are required to be there in case something happens. So what is an amateur station's control point?
Can I call someone for a lifeline and get an answer?
Charlie?
It could be Charlie, but I mean, I would imagine where the equipment actually is. I'm just gonna.
Remember, you don't have to be.
Really don't have to be there, so he can.
If he's remote,
If
he's
remote.
still, the control point is where he is
Okay,
or she is. So if I'm doing one of these like remote ham, where I can go operate a station in Australia remotely, control point is where I am. And you can do that for free if you're licensed. Which is an example of remote control as defined in Part 97.
I'm kidding.
Well, these were all 97 definitions.
All of your above. Yeah, no.
You're going to go with Delta.
Boy, I don't know when I would call it that way.
Well, he's controlling it over the internet, that one we just talked about. But remote control,
Remember, it's how it's defined in Part 97 as remote control.
Did we
cars
talk
and
about,
aircraft is Part 97.
I don't think we talked about remote control cars and boats. and-
Yeah, we did.
We did a little while.
Yeah, because it's encrypted.
Yeah,
Ah,
told him is the word.
There was an exception.
An exception, so that's why I thought maybe that was.
Example is operating over the internet or some other sort of link. Which of the following are required for remote control operation?
Delta.
I'm having a problem with indirectly. If it's delta, then indirectly manipulate control.
Well, it means you're doing it remotely. You're not directly turning the knob. You're doing it from somewhere else and effectively, you're not actually physically rotating the knob, but you're changing the frequency on the radio.
Blurry definition of the vaccine.
Well, let's see, because this is one of those kind of tricky ones, I guess. But, yeah. Which of the following is an example of automatic control?
I always get confused on that.
Repeaters.
Alpha.
I guess repeaters and is an auxiliary station automatic? I don't really know what that actually is.
No, I have a walkie-talkie in the base station.
Repeater operation. Okay, so indecent, obscene language is prohibited. Transmitting music is permitted when it's incidental to authorized transmission of manned spacecraft communications. So they kind of gave the NASA people a exception there. Encoded transmissions are not allowed except when you're talking to a space station or controlling radio control models. Talking to restricted countries is prohibited, and that's defined as any country whose administration has notified the ITU that it objects to communications.
So if they don't.
If they don't notify them, you can do it.
You make their sanctions.
I don't know that.
Yeah,
I think sanctions has to do with money.
I know, but I just feel it's shouldn't be.
Okay, compensation is only permitted when it's incidental to classroom instruction at a educational institution. Sales is permitted when you're doing amateur radio equipment on a non-regular basis. Broadcasting is prohibited, defining it as transmissions to the general public, except in emergency cases. Control operator and control types. The control operator is the station licensee by default, can be designated to somebody else by the station licensee, and you're supposed to document it at your station. So when the FCC guy comes and wants to review your records, you can show that you.
Kind of record. Are you supposed to keep records when you're doing this?
Yes, and we will get to some more of those. You're required to have your station license. You're required to have your, however you do them, calculations or whatever on radiation exposure and up to date. In other words, when you set up your station, you're supposed to do radiation exposure calculations or measurements, however you do it, to verify that the controlled and uncontrolled environments do not exceed the maximum permissible radiation levels. And if you make changes, like you put a new antenna up, You buy a power amplifier, you get a different radio, anything that would affect the radiation pattern or the power output, you have to redo and update those calculations. If you designate somebody else as control operator, you're supposed to document that. There's probably a few other
Taking
things.
a log of all this stuff somehow.
Well, you just kind of need to keep those things. It's not required to have a station log anymore as far as contacts. That apparently used to be a requirement, but you do not have to keep a log. But it's probably a good thing to do. Especially for people.
I enjoy keeping a log on QRZ. I mean, I keep a paper log also. But the thing about keeping the log on QRZ too is now that I'm operating HF, it's kind of become a collection of flags. Because every connection you make, every log entry that you make, it puts the nationality flag on it. So it's kind of cool to look down the list, see all the different flags that I've talked to.
Okay, you always have to have a control operator defined. Can be any licensed amateur with the appropriate privileges, like in the one question, a technician can't operate a station that's operating on the extra band. The control operator is responsible as well as the licensee if they're different people for the proper operation. And any amateur can contact a space station or the space station if you have the appropriate uplink privileges. Control point is where the control operator function is performed. Remote control is operating over the internet or some other interconnection. You still have to have a control operator at the control point where you're indirectly manipulating the controls. And you have to have a control operator whenever it's operating. In the case of automatic, the control operator is not present at the control point. And you have to have some procedures and things set up in case of failure where you can shut the transmitter down, things like that automatically.